A drug is a substance or an agent, anything other than food, that is basically used to treat, alleviate any discomfort or pain.
I've wasted basically the last 30 years of my life because I was in a drug-induced stupor.
If you drink coffee, if you eat chocolate, if you take a pill for a headache, or syrup for a cough, you're using drugs.
The access to drugs is getting easier and easier.
If it wasn't for some divine power, I probably would be dead.
Like people, drugs look and feel and act differently from one another. Some stimulate us, some sedate us. Still others affect us in ways we can't always imagine and certainly never predict. There are drugs found in nature and those created in a lab. Some are legal, some aren't.
Opium is vital as a medicine. For thousands and thousands of years, it has been one of the most valuable medicines at the disposal of human beings.
Smoking crack was dark, scary, and lonely.
A lot of the medical reasons that people give for using marijuana are valid reasons for the effect that that has.
That deep down inside feeling that I had negative towards myself was gone.
Throughout time and history, across cultures and countries, drugs have been ever present. They've been used in religious ceremonies, as medicinal aids, and for sheer sensory pleasure. They've often improved and saved lives. They've also destroyed and ended them.
The more you love someone, the more you get hurt by their drug use.
We always like to think of it as a problem for the other, and the reality is a problem for all of us.
Cannabis sativa. That's the name of the hemp plant whose leaves, stems, resins, and oils have been medically used and abused for thousands of years. Though native to Central Asia, the hemp plant is cultivated around the world for many different purposes. The tough stem fiber is used in making textiles like rope and sailcloth. The hemp seed is used in feed mixtures. Its oil is an ingredient in soap and paints. And of course, much of the plant material is used to make the illegal drugs known as marijuana, hashish, and hash oil. All three may be smoked. Marijuana and hashish may also be eaten.
It is a potent drug that lights up the dopamine pleasure centers in the brain. It has certain properties that are reinforcing. It is commonly used in many cultures as an aphrodisiac. It is mildly hallucinogenic. But quite beyond the physical properties of the drug, marijuana in the 60s and the 70s was a political symbol. You know, if you lit up a joint in 1969, it said, not only do I want to get high and have a good time, it signaled that you were opposed to the war in Vietnam, it signaled your allegiance to the counterculture, your status as a cool person. See, drugs are social products. They are chemicals that make us feel good in a variety of ways. But beyond this, they have all of these social and symbolic uses. And marijuana was most emphatically a social drug in the late 60s and 70s. I mean, one indication of that is that it was relatively rare for people to get stoned alone. You know, that was uncool. It was something you did in a group, passing a joint around.
There are as many as 60 drugs derived from the hemp plant that are called cannabinoids. THC, short for delta-9-tetrahydrocannabinol, is the psychoactive substance cannabinoids contain. The cannabinoids change the way your brain works within minutes of use. The THC that's inhaled and held in the lungs activates cannabinoid receptors found in different parts of the brain, quickly altering perception, intensifying experiences, and creating euphoria. Uncontrollable laughter is often followed by hunger and paranoia.
Tetrahydrocannabinol, or delta-9, is the active ingredient that gets you high. There are over 400 other chemicals in marijuana before you light it. And when you light it, they get into the thousands, and they're only like looking at several of them.
After the abolition of slavery, the sugar planters needed a new source of labor. They couldn't just keep sending slaves from Africa. So one solution was to bring indentured workers from India to the Caribbean. And many of these workers were familiar with smoking cannabis, or what they called ganja. And from Jamaica and other Caribbean islands, the practice spread and was introduced into the United States probably by sailors in port cities like New Orleans early in the 20th century.
Marijuana goes by hundreds of other names: pot, ganja, herb, weed, grass, reefer, Mary Jane. These are just a few of the more familiar. Joint, doobie, or nail are street terms for a marijuana cigarette. A roach is the butt of the cigarette. Cigars packed with pot are called blunts. A bong is a water pipe used for smoking marijuana.
See, I've heard a lot of people say that it makes them giggly, but for me, it made me real depressed. And they say that pot's not an addictive drug, but for me it was, because I had to have it. Or I was in a bad mood, in a bad space, and it just pretty much brought me down all the time.
Addiction and alcoholism is something that creeps up on you before you know it. You know, you find yourself in that situation, and it's very difficult to quit. Very difficult to quit. And unfortunately, curiosity and peer pressure and get access to it is something harder to fight off.
I used to think that marijuana was harmless. Obviously, I started using it at a young age. I grew it, was quite proud of myself for growing a very exotic strand of marijuana, prided myself. I used to take pictures of myself with it. I used to play classical music to it. And it continued to get a hold on me in a very subtle way. I'd get up in the morning, roll a joint. I thought, hey, I can go through life, I can do things and continue to smoke pot. And then I'd do some at lunch. And then I'd do some in the afternoon, and then I'd do some at night.
Marijuana is made from the flowers, leaves, and stems of the hemp plant. First dried, then chopped, the mixture is usually green, brown, or gray. It looks a lot like parsley or grass clippings. Although marijuana can be mixed with foods or brewed as tea, it's usually smoked by either rolling it as a cigarette or putting it into a pipe. Its effects begin within minutes. A few hours later, they're gone, often leaving the user tired and hungry.
People at Johns Hopkins University discovered a THC compound that our brain makes, and they named it anandamide. And they know that anandamide binds to these THC receptors in the brain. So we know that this is widely spread. So now we know when people smoke pot where it attacks on the brain. And we can map these receptor sites, and lo and behold, there's a whole lot of them right in the area of the brain where memory occurs. We've known anecdotally that people who smoke a lot of pot have trouble remembering things, like where they are, where they're going. You know, the short-term memory is very much impaired. It also affects the cerebellum, which is in the back of the brain that handles coordination and your ability to, your gait and coordination. And we know when you're stoned, people don't walk or run very well.
It's an accumulative drug. The more you smoke it, the more it stays in your system for longer periods of time. So I worked with a guy one time, took 96 days for all the THC to leave his system. And he quit smoking. He had 96 days clean, and he still was testing positive for THC. So it really stays in your system.
Marijuana's effects aren't always predictable. They depend on lots of different variables: the personality of the user, what the past experience has been, whether other drugs are being taken, if there are any expectations, and most importantly, the amount of THC present. Today's marijuana is many times more potent than the pot smoked just a few years ago. That means its effects are also more intense.
One of the unusual effects of marijuana is what's called the amotivational syndrome. We don't know exactly why this happens, but people just lose their motivation to do things. And here you're trying to motivate somebody through treatment, and they're suffering from the amotivational treatment syndrome. A lot more marijuana addicts just don't have an interest in going through treatment. They never complete it. I see that more happen with people that have been long-term marijuana users than with just about any other substance.
Like cigarettes, marijuana is classified as a gateway drug. That means if you use pot, you're more likely to use stronger drugs.
What was put forward as the negative effect of marijuana was the fact that it would lead to other drugs of abuse. And in fact, over the years, marijuana has become a drug that has become quite a bit more potent. It has an identified withdrawal syndrome now, and is identified as being a very addictive substance.
From what I've seen, it's that one time, it's that opportunity when you're drunk, that one time you're drunk, that one time you're stoned, your guard's down. And if someone else brings another drug, a lot of the clients that I work with that are hooked on cocaine, that are hooked on heroin, tried heroin, tried crack, when they were stoned on pot, when they were drunk on alcohol, their guard was down, they were brave enough to try it, and try it again, and try it again, and try it again.
Although widely used in medicine during the last half of the 19th century, cannabis was prohibited in 1937 after decades of abuse.
Use remained a factor on the American drug scene in the late 30s, the 40s, and 50s. But it really took off in the 1960s and 1970s when large numbers of baby boomers began experimenting with the drug. If you look, for example, at the number of arrests for marijuana smoking, you see that around 1964 and 1965, they just began to skyrocket. And it became the illicit drug of choice for that generation.
Chemically synthesized versions of THC are legally available by prescription for the treatment of anorexia, nausea, and vomiting, symptoms usually experienced by cancer and AIDS patients. One of the controversies surrounding the use of synthetic THC is the belief by some patients that it's just not as effective as the naturally occurring THC found in a marijuana cigarette. Studies in the late 1990s seem to support this.
With HIV patients, their bodies and immune systems are just deteriorating, and then they develop other illnesses. A lot of times they can go blind. I've seen a couple patients go blind. They'll use it for their eyes. A lot of them use it just to escape reality too, but They'll use it for the pain that they're having. They get a lot of pain in their legs and neuropathy, a lot of sensations in their legs, and they'll use it to avoid some of that pain.
And people say, well, people are dying of AIDS, why can't they have pot to help them with nausea? Well, there are other traditional medicines that help with nausea. You don't have to turn to pot to help somebody with glaucoma, for heaven's sakes. I mean, there have been medicines, clean medicines that have been tested and approved by the FDA that are safe for these particular illnesses and diseases and conditions.
I think there needs to be a current social debate concerning some of these drugs in relationship to medicinal purposes. For instance, the person who is on very devastating chemotherapies for cancer, let's say, and one of the most horrible side effects is almost this chronic wrenching nausea. And we know that smoking a reefer, a joint of marijuana, will help that. And we're in this social quandary.
A lot of the medical reasons that people give for using marijuana are valid reasons for the effect that has, but you can get that effect through other medications, legal medications.
There seems to be this kind of subculture that wants to take, mood-altering drugs that have, for the most part, been harmful and sort of lead, make them credible somehow. And I see that as undermining the whole concept of helping people to understand that we need to live our lives without these mood-altering chemicals. So I'm really against that.
This push for this decriminalizing or legalizing marijuana for medicinal purposes is kind of a sham in my mind, because we have synthetic drugs that do a much better job. So I'm assuming the people that want to smoke the dope just want to still get high. And again, I don't have if I'm dying and I'm doing chemotherapy, who cares if I'm getting stoned once in a while?
We have a tendency, particularly in this country, to think in terms of black and whites, good and bad, a very fundamental approach. I think we need to try to get away from that and think more in terms of just being responsible for that which God has given us, whether it is our own spiritual growth or whether it is, the grass that He's given us. I mean, God planted marijuana. He didn't tell us to abuse it, but it's here for a reason. So perhaps, we at least have to be open to the fact that there could be medicinal purposes for many of these chemicals that we consider illicit or bad chemicals.
Cannabis use in the United States was actually pretty rare in the 19th century. There was some experimentation with hashish, but it was really exotic. There were a few artists and actors and curious physicians who smoked hashish, but it was rare.
Hashish is a drug that is made from marijuana. It's the resin part of the marijuana. It's compressed into a dark black-looking substance or dark brown-looking substance. It's smoked. Generally, you see it associated with people from the, I guess you'd say, from the Mideast, India, Pakistan. It's always been around, but it's never really been a first drug of choice. Just marijuana itself is much more popular.
Like pot, hashish contains the psychoactive ingredient THC. Only it's much stronger, as much as 3 times or more greater in THC concentration.
You end up not smoking as much. A small piece of hash would be the equivalent of maybe a large joint. So a small piece of hash could get in a small room in a hookah, the pipes, the Middle Eastern pipes. A group of men will sit around and will just smoke small amounts of hash in their hookahs, and actually they'll sometimes mix the hash with tobacco, and that's really popular in Europe. Is mixing tobacco and hashish together, and not actually going for the bulk of the plant itself.
Hashish is really the resin of the hemp plant. It's gathered by scraping or boiling the flowering tops of the female hemp plants. That's where the resin is most concentrated. Prepared, it looks like brown or black cake or balls. In this form, hashish is usually broken into pieces and smoked in a pipe. It can also be eaten. Hashish produces effects similar to marijuana, but the effects are intensified. So subtle changes in sensory perception become more vivid. Hearing may become keener. Taste buds may be sharper. Vision more acute. Other effects from hashish may be more intense. Mood swings can be greater. Fragmented thoughts more disturbing. And effects like clumsiness, disorientation, and paranoia can become more difficult to control. Hash oil is a thick, syrupy liquid that ranges from clear to dark in color. Because the THC content is from 20 to 50%, it can take only a drop or two of hash oil to equal the effect of a single marijuana cigarette.
Now, hash oil, although one would think that it is somehow closely related to hashish, it's really not. It's not the tars, it's actually the oil from the plant that they're extracting. So it's actually a little bit different than what you would think it would be from being called hash oil. And in doing those two processes, they can increase the THC level, making it higher, which will give them a better high and a longer high.
High doses of cannabis, like the kind found in hash oil, can cause toxic psychosis, image distortion, fantasies, and hallucinations. Cannabis, in fact, has hallucinogenic properties.
No one really knows themselves, their chemistry. They may know themselves psychologically, like, I'm not an aggressive person. When I loosen up, if I have a beer and I loosen up, I feel like I'm a fun person or something. They may know that, but they don't know their body chemistry. They don't know that by smoking a joint, they're going to believe that every branch of law enforcement agencies in the country is going to be waiting at the door to come in and get them. Or they're going to have an automobile accident on the way home. And worst case scenario of everything, and just freaking out, getting very paranoid.
Cannabinoids are the drugs produced from the hemp plant Cannabis sativa. Marijuana, hashish, and hash oil are all cannabinoids. While the effects they produce are similar, the drugs look different from one another and vary in their potency. Their potency depends on the amount of THC they contain.
Your brain cells are all fat. So when it gets on your brains, it clouds your brains over. That's why when you're looking at somebody, they have that kind of flat affect where I call it the vacant lot look, but it's that flat affect, and you would use an expression like, well, you know, he's burned out or she's burned out by looking at them because they don't seem like they have any electrodes going off, sparking, because the THC has kind of formed, not medically, but formed a blanket over your brain so that it just slows you down. Actually, that's what you want it to do anyway. You want to feel the effect of getting wasted.
You remember the old Cheech and Chong records, you know?
Yeah, who's there, man? Hey, it's Dave, man. You know, let me in. I got the stuff. Dave? Yeah, it's Dave, man. Let me in. I got the stuff.
No, Dave's not here, man. You know, I mean, it's funny, but a lot of that stuff is based in fact. You know, when you start to think about it, the old jokes about the marijuana addict, the pothead, there's a lot of truth in that kind of stuff. Their reasoning is impaired. They can't think straight. They're just not quite as motivated. They kind of slow them in, you know, that kind of stuff.
When I first started working as a caseworker, a lot of the students that I was counseling were 15, 16 years old with a pretty moderate drug history. Now I'm seeing that, 8 or 9 years old, and we're talking with a history already, not once or twice tried pot, once or twice had a drink. We're talking moderate drug use at 8 or 9 years old.
Marijuana is the mildest of all the cannabinoids. Hash oil, the strongest. All the cannabinoids create a feeling of well-being and a sense of relaxation. They can also alter sensory perceptions, impair judgment, and affect short-term memory. Long-term effects include respiratory damage, suppressed immunity, and cancer. Delayed puberty has been shown in male teens, disrupted menstrual cycles in females.
Also, if the mother is smoking marijuana while she's pregnant, because marijuana is fat-soluble and not water-soluble, it stays with the baby almost all the time that she's pregnant, and the only way the baby can get rid of it is after it's born, because it can't work it out of its system. The mother can, but the baby can't. So it's pretty dangerous and pretty damaging. It also damages the male sperm, and it decreases its motility and mobility. So it will, it actually slows, like the blood cells, it slows the sperm down. So it's kind of like if the sperm could talk, it would say, oh, I don't really care if I get there.
I started to do more smoking and started to go to less classes, thinking that in my mind that, yeah, I want to get this scholarship, But what I actually did was I hurt myself. I didn't train in the off season like I should have. I came in second team tailback, walk on, and in a couple of months I had dropped to fourth team.
If you try to say pot, you're forward, lackadaisical attitude. I mean, football is the worst place to be in a relaxed state because it's an intense sport. And the legal ramifications, I mean, if you were caught, you're kicked out of school. There goes your future. And that's a part of a record that will probably follow you from now on, He's a good guy, but she's a good girl, but they were caught, pump. And then there's also testing. And if you try them, it's going to be in your system. You're not going to get it out of your system just because you go home and you might try to flush it out. It doesn't flush out that easy.
It takes anywhere from 6 months to 2 years for a heavy pot smoker to kick all the marijuana out of their system. And heavy is considered more than 3 joints a week now, or its equivalent.
You're impaired cognitively and in your memory long after the drug is worn off. Now, alcohol doesn't do that. When the alcohol's gone, you're hungover, and you know what you can and can't do. But this drug tells you you can, and in fact, you can't perform. That's why I think it's so dangerous.
All types of drugs, they take you out of your game, I know some people say, oh, you ain't with that. No, it's real. I've been there. I've dreamed, and I've lost dreams. Not because I couldn't do it, or not because somebody was better than me. I lost dreams because I did it to myself.
I've wasted basically the last 30 years of my life because I was in a drug-induced stupor from using marijuana on a daily basis. My children were born while I was high on marijuana and cocaine. That's no way to be. I wish I could take that back, but I can't.